Good morning. Welcome to Harris Hall and the April 4th regular meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. Glad to see you all here this morning. Good morning, Ms. Morgowski. Do we have any adjustments to the agenda?
No.
To the board? I'm seeing none. How about emergency business?
No.
I see none from the board. Then we'll move along with item 3 on our agenda, which is public comments. The Board of County Commissioners will listen to public comment both in person and online. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Keep an eye on the clock on the wall if you are speaking from the dais, and you will receive a 30-second warning. It'll be an audio warning at 30 seconds from the conclusion of your time to speak. I'll entertain speakers from inside Harris Hall first, and this morning we have, nobody signed up. So, Ms. Jones, do we have anyone signed up online?
Thank you, Chair Farr. I do see that we have an attendee online. At this time, if you would like to present public comment during this meeting, please raise your virtual hand, and I will call upon you to give comment. I have Shava Cronin online to give testimony. Shava, I will unmute your line, and you may begin your public comment. I do show you are, there you go.
Hi, so you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. And I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Hava Cronin, and I am the somewhat newly minted housing outreach specialist for Head Start of Lane County. For those of you who don't know, Head Start of Lane County serves nearly 1,000 families that are low income with children the age of 0 to 5 years old. I just really wanted to thank the county and with the rental assistance. I was able to get Head Start of Lane County the opportunity to request rental assistance directly, and I want to thank a few people: Kate Budd, Noelle Lamore, Susan Band, Nancy McReynolds, and Brandy Adams. These are names I haven't met in person, but they have helped me navigate the system to help these families that I'm working with directly. And I did want to share just one thank you from a family who received rent assistance. She says, "Hello, my name is Savannah Case. I was asked to say a few words on how the rental assistance has helped me and my family. We have been affected hard, just like millions of other families, from things like COVID and the rising costs in food and gas and everything else. Me and my 3 kids have lived with my adopted mother and father in a manufactured home because of such hard times. And recently, my mother lost her job, which put us in a very tough spot, getting eviction notice after eviction notice. Our funds are hard because only my mother is an able adult and is able to work, as my dad is a retired truck driver and a disabled Vietnam vet. I am disabled fighting for disability due to a rare blood disorder. So you can believe, what you can believe makes things tough and tight, but we do the best we can as always. Until lately, if it wasn't for this money and help received, all of us would have become homeless and led me back to the hospital in the long run. I thank everyone involved from the bottom of my heart. Thanks to this, my babies didn't have to endure what so many kids have to every day. There needs to be more help like this available. So once more, thank you for everything." I just wanted to share that, and I do hope that there is plans for continued rent assistance as this emergency money does run out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hava Cronin.
At this time, Chair Farr, I do not have anyone else signed up for public comment, so I will return the meeting to you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, and I'll look around Harris Hall. Does anyone in Harris Hall wish to address the Board of County Commissioners? I see none, then public comment is closed. Thank you for being here this morning. And then we'll move to item 4 on the agenda, which is Commissioner's response to public comments and or other issues and remonstrances. I'll look across the board to see if there's anyone. I see no hands raised. Then we're moving along very quickly, Mr. Morgowski. Next item on today's, actually I'm going to telegraph something for you for an agenda request later on in this meeting. The week of April 27th, I'm going to ask that we entertain the Coast Guard Auxiliary Color Guard. They'd like to present colors in commemoration of Safe Voting Week, and that would be at 9 a.m. on the I believe it's the 24th is the meeting that week. So, and I'll ask that formally in the agenda request, Ms. Mulcahy. All righty, then we'll move along to item 5 on the agenda, which is the consent calendar. We have before us a consent calendar. All the items on this consent calendar have a view material icon. If you click that, you'll see all of the items that the Board of County Commissioners has considered when deciding to leave these items on the consent calendar. The consent calendar will be passed by a single motion. Any item that needed to be pulled would have been pulled in preparation for this meeting and held and discussed as a separate item. So we have the consent calendar. Do I have a motion? Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I move approval of the consent calendar as presented for Tuesday, April 4th, 2023.
I'll second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Buck. The consent calendar. Discussion to the motion. I'm seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Time to go home. Just kidding. Next on the agenda, we have from our Health and Human Services Department, Mr. Mokrajewski, a discussion on the status on progress with unhoused population initiatives. And we have a panel today, Mr. Mokrajewski. I'll turn it over to you to introduce your panel.
Thank you, Chair. I will welcome up trying to see who all we're going to have.
Computer.
I think I'll introduce Kate Budd, our interim Human Services Division Manager, and Kate can do introductions and kick this item off. The board, of course, knows that we have presented on this topic previously, and given state action and the governor's executive order, there's been a lot of moving parts, so we're looking forward to a robust update from our team today, and of course, the opportunity to answer questions from commissioners.
Mr. Mokrajewski, I'm going to say this is an all-star team. I've been around them quite a bit over the last few weeks with the works of the MAC. We'll hear more about that today, but it really has been stellar work. I'm looking right at you, Carly.
We've seen each other a lot.
We do, in fact.
Well, good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I'm pleased to be here today with Carly Walker, who is our HMIS Supervisor. Carly has been in her current role for almost 6 months now and had previously served as a management analyst with our HMIS team. So she has a rich history of serving through the HMIS data system. And then we also have Patience Winningham Melcher, our emergency management director. Titles are challenging. Who's also joining us because she and I are working hand in hand with the all-in Lane County efforts through the state. So I will first turn it over to Carly, and I will try to, let's see. So today, as a part of our unhoused programming update, our agenda includes sharing the Homeless Management Information System annual reports and where we are based on the last federal fiscal year in working toward achieving the HUD system performance measurements. And Carly will be providing that update. After that, we'll provide an update regarding the all-in efforts here locally, which is connected to the governor's executive order around homelessness. And then lastly, we'll be focusing on our half-yearly outcome and outputs for the over 60 different programs that the Housing and Community Action Team oversees here in our community. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Carly.
All right, so I have updates on a few reports today. We do submit 4 reports each year to HUD as part of our participation and for the continuum of care. One of those is due in January, another one is due in February, and then the last one's due in about 3 weeks, or those last 2. So I have updates on the longitudinal system analysis and then also the system performance measures. In a few months, I can also, if you'd like, give an update on the housing inventory chart or count, depending on what you decide the C stands for, and the point in time count. So I have one slide of just like preliminary information, but I'll have a lot more after it's been submitted. So for now, the LSA and the SPMs, which we submitted in the last few months, I've tried to break down the acronyms where I can, but let me know We like those a lot. And I should say that HMIS stands for the Homeless Management Information System. So that's the system that all of our providers use to enter information. Some of them are homeless providers and some of them are not. And so they're not all included in this report, unfortunately, but I do think is important to mention. We have a very robust system. The system performance measures are a list of measures or metrics that HUD defines for us and have very specific definitions, and we report on these measures year after year. And all continuums of care do this. It includes all of the project types that are in the other report I'll talk about, so emergency shelter, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing. But it also includes street outreach, which I think is helpful. And the goal of this report is to answer kind of one question, which is, does our continuum of care meet the needs of people experiencing homelessness in our community? And you'll see the other report really focuses on households, but this one is very much focused on individuals. And that's why some of these measures sound similar, but the numbers might look different across the two reports, individuals versus households. I also have some updates on the LSA, which is the longitudinal system analysis. This is more of a back and forth process where we submit some information to HUD, they ask some questions back, and we do some data cleaning and revision and explanations of some of these measures back and forth. So once our data was considered to be usable or acceptable, it was included in the report to Congress, which they call the AHAR, if you've heard of that before. As part of this back and forth process, they take all the data that we submit and they visualize it using a system called Stella. So there's lots of images coming up, and those all come from Stella. I included more in your packet because I know there's lots to see and lots to pick through. These are all of the same project types as before, minus street outreach. So really, any place where folks stay the night is somewhere that you might, is a project you might see included in this report. The goal is to answer this question, which is how our system functions for different household types. So really focused on households instead. And I do just want to note this because I like to brag about what we have in our county that's, I think, very uncommon, which is the participation of so many providers who we don't have to report on to HUD. And unfortunately, we can't include them in this report. And I've included some examples of those in your packet. But things like alternative shelter, so our safe sleep spots, our food pantries, social service organizations, services-only projects. There are so many other things that we do and that we have information on that we just don't get to include in this report, which, while unfortunate, does make it so we can be compared to other continuums of care. If they're not including that information, and we're also not including that information, it makes it more of an apples-to-apples comparison. So there's downsides and there's upsides, I would say. And then both of these reports are based on that federal fiscal year, like Kate mentioned. So October 21 through September of 22.
Ms. Walker, I have a clarifying question from the Vice Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you. And just to be clear, we do collect data from those sources. It's just not in
Yes.
this report. I just want to make that really clear for anyone
Yeah.
watching. So we internally, we have access to
Yes.
those and can compare our own internal apples to our own internal apples or
Correct.
oranges, as the case may be, but just
Yeah.
for the purposes of, because of HUD requirements. I just wanted to make sure people understood that we do collect that data
Yeah.
and use it.
Thank you. And so, no, they're not included in some of the information here in these slides, but we absolutely do have that information. Just doesn't get passed along to HUD. So I know there's a lot of acronyms to navigate, and the easiest way, I think, to understand these reports is to see how they affect individual people. So here are some examples of folks who were included during this reporting period. First is Anna, who is a single mom with a child of school age, who experienced a housing loss. They lost their rental and were unhoused for 1 week, then moved into an emergency shelter focused on families. And that shelter provided them with job search assistance and a housing search, helped them get into a rental. And then after this, just like Commissioner Trieger was talking about, this isn't included in the HUD reporting, but after they moved into that rental, we were able to support them with a few months of rent assistance through a housing stabilization program. So they got case management and a little bit of support right at move-in, and exited successfully and still have not returned to homelessness. Another example would be Mark, who's a single veteran and his like 50s to 60s age, who experienced a housing loss and was unhoused for 2 months. Then he was enrolled in an alternative shelter project, and these are one of these projects that we spend a lot of time and investment in, but don't get included in the report. But at the same time, he was also enrolled in Housing Navigation Street Outreach, and that's something that is included. He stayed in that shelter and that street outreach program for 8 months. They helped him do a front door assessment, so he entered the coordinated entry system and was on the central wait list. At the same time, a few months after that enrollment, he was enrolled into veteran-focused rapid rehousing. So they also worked with him on his housing search. He had all 3 programs working with him at the same time and was able to move into a rental. So certainly we have many other situations that come up, but I think these are 2 really good examples of some parts of this are getting included, other parts are not. We have a holistic view of what happened with these individuals, and not all of these pieces will come into the reports. We report on a lot of metrics. I wanted to start with the system performance measures, and I've just pulled a few here. We certainly have more, and I included more in the packet. But I've got a few of the goals that HUD has for us and how we've performed on those goals in the last few years. So the first goal is to reduce the length of time that people in emergency shelter and transitional housing remain homeless. So how many days homeless were they until they became housed? And you can see across the years, we're doing better on this metric than we have before. So people who are in emergency shelter and transitional housing have shorter periods of homelessness. We're able to exit them to house situations more quickly. 1B is exactly that same goal, but we also include individuals who are in permanent housing. And when we involve people in permanent housing, you'll see that metric we don't perform quite as well. There could be many reasons for that. One of those could be that we're serving people in permanent housing who really need that additional support and who have experienced homelessness for longer periods of time. So when we include those folks, that number does increase. It's a larger period of homelessness. And here's how both Anna and Mark would be counted or not counted in those reports. So when we're talking about the length of time folks are in shelter, Anna and her child were homeless for 73 days. That's the period from losing their rental up to moving into the new one. And so they're included in that metric where we've done better. Mark isn't included because alternative shelter does not meet that requirement for emergency shelter. When we talk about the metric that includes permanent housing, so that 1B goal, which has gone down, we include Anna and her child, but we also include Mark, who was homeless for 308 days. That's the time from he lost housing until moving into a rental. So when we include those folks who need those additional supports, that's why that number has kind of increased. A couple more goals that we reported on. One is to increase the successful placements in permanent housing from street outreach. And this is an area where we're doing much better than we have in previous years. There are many reasons for this, but one is certainly we have a lot more street outreach projects than we used to. The case conferencing across those street outreach workers has gotten a lot better. And also, there's been a lot of specific outreach to individuals who are on the coordinated entry list near the top to make sure that they're housing ready and to help them get into those permanent housing situations. 7B1 is to increase the successful placements in permanent housing, not from street outreach, but from shelter and permanent housing. So just because you get enrolled in a rapid rehousing or a permanent supportive housing project doesn't mean you make it quite all the way to that point of housing. Sometimes it doesn't work out. When we look at this group of people, the percentage has gone down pretty significantly compared to last year. But if we consider 2021 to be sort of an outlier, we're doing pretty similarly to how we've done in previous years. And I think this has a lot to do with the fact that in that 2021 federal year, we had a much smaller number of emergency shelter beds. So the number of people, I like to think in fractions, that denominator is much smaller than it was in those other years. So we weren't able to serve as many people. We were able to house a higher percentage of them. When we look at the 2022 year, when those shelter beds opened back up, and maybe we were able to serve folks who weren't quite as vulnerable through that shelter process, that percentage goes down. This is my last SPM slide. Mark was included in this first goal of individuals from street outreach who exit to permanent housing. So he's one of those successful exits. And both Mark and Anna are included in the successful exits from shelter and permanent housing because Anna was enrolled in shelter and Mark was enrolled in a rapid rehousing. I have a lot of images from the LSA, which I think are really fun to look at. But before that, I just wanted to give high-level highlights first. One is that we served far more people through these project types, which are exactly the same as the last report, minus street outreach. Far more people this year than we did in the previous year. So it's about 1,100 more households, about 1,100 more individuals. It's a lot. The percentage of households we exited to positive destinations went down, but the total number of households we exited went up. So similar to that emergency shelter conversation, we weren't able to serve as many people in the year before, so it might look like we did a better job, but the total number of people is actually much higher. This report is highly focused on exits, which are considered positive, so exiting a program to some sort of permanent housing destination, and also returns to homelessness. So of those individuals who exit somewhere positive, how many return and to one of those systems later? Positive exits were most common for adult and child households and for households who got the more intensive support. So transitional housing, rapid rehousing, or permanent supportive housing. If you had one of those enrollments, you were more likely to exit somewhere positive. And returns to homelessness were most common for child-only households, which in the graphics I think are very easy to see. Here's a general overview of how we did during the federal fiscal year. You can see we served almost 3,900 households and over 4,700 people. And just a reminder, that's not our whole HMIS system, just those project types where folks stay overnight. So still there's a lot of things that we're doing to work on this goal that don't get included in these numbers. On average, these individuals were homeless for 141 days. Of the households that exited to any destination, 15% of those exits were positive. So that's 364 households. And this next metric for returns, I have what I think is a better one a few slides on. But of the households who exited somewhere positive in the first 6 months of the reporting period, here's how many came back, which is 13%. It's just a really small period of time. So I've got a longer period of time later on, but that's 24 households that returned to homelessness in the first 6 months. I've got some basic demographics here of individuals who are included in the report. You can see most are male, and most are between the ages of 25 and 64. Most have a race and ethnicity of white non-Latino, although that percentage is lower than the general census population. And there's a very high percentage of individuals who are chronically homeless. Chronic homelessness is kind of a complex definition, but all of these individuals have a disability and have been unhoused or in shelter for at least 12 months in the last 3 years. There's some more complicated parts, but that's the broad strokes of it.
Okay. Ms. Walker, I have another question for you.
Folks returning to homelessness, are there any trends that you're seeing? Do we know the contributing factors that differentiate folks returning to homelessness from those not? And I don't know if it's connected. I ask because the disabling conditions. Are we seeing any consistencies that we can target services to reduce that number?
That's something I could definitely dig into. Definitely, I have some ideas based on, and I can come back to this slide, but when those individuals are returning back. So you can see based on different household types, it comes at different points in time. So that might be an indicator of that. And I was going to get to this in a moment. But for adult-only households, it's mostly in the 60 to 180 days. So depending on where they exit to, that might be related to getting into a rental and then finding out they actually don't have the funds to support that rental, for example. For child-only households, it's very high, and I think this has a lot to do with returning to family, and then that situation ends up not being stable, which is complicated, for sure. I want to go back to exits just for a moment. These are the number of households that exited or the number of households that exited is in the inner circle. And then below that, you'll see what percentage of those exits were positive. So in 2021, we didn't exit that many people, and that's because we didn't serve that many people, or we didn't serve as many households. There was just significantly reduced capacity because of COVID and congregate shelter restrictions, and staffing, to be honest, on behalf of some of the agencies. In this last federal fiscal year, we were able to serve far more households. So while the percentage we exited was lower, the actual number of households we were able to help successfully is higher. And at the bottom, you can see by household type where those were more successful or not. So our child-only exits are down quite a bit. Our adult and child exits are actually up. And then adult-only kind of hovers, but it's pretty similar across years. This is my favorite chart. On the left side, you'll see by pathway, so by the types of projects that individuals are enrolled in, how many of those households exited. And then on the right side, it tells you what percentage of those exits were positive. So of course, this doesn't capture some of the other work that we're doing, like alternative shelters, intensive case management, street outreach. These things aren't included here. But you can see that those households that are involved in more than just shelter, essentially, so transitional housing, if rapid rehousing is a piece, if permanent supportive housing is a piece, those positive exits are more likely to occur.
We have another quick question, Ms. Walker?
Sure.
You just said it. I was hoping that you would explain the shorthand on the side on the left, and you just did, so thank you.
Yeah. And then also we've included a couple of other annotations on top of this image, which are, Kate's going to talk about All-In in a few minutes, and which of these pathways will be influenced by the additional All-In funding. And really, I think we could put stars next to more, because we'll have more rapid rehousing, so anything that involves rapid rehousing might be included there. And then also we'll have additional shelter beds. You'll also see there's the approximate cost of how much each of those beds or units costs.
Well, thank you, Ms. Walker. I really love your presentations, whether it's at the MAC or in this format. You give great information, accurate information that's very well researched, and paints really a stark picture of what we have in front of us. And before we move along, Ms. Budd, I'd like to look at Mark's example, for instance.
Sure.
Who was homeless for 308 days before getting permanent housing. He was a mid-aged veteran who lost his rental for whatever reason, whether it be priced out of it or didn't make the payments, whatever it may be, went into homelessness, went through several stages before almost a year later, 308 days later, Mark, who was a single individual, should be relatively easy in terms of rehousing people, took 308 days. And that's what we're up against. And I think as we look at the steps along the way, one of the big issues that we have is there's no place to go. You know, when you get to a certain level, you're ready for permanent housing, but if there's no permanent housing available, you can't move somebody into something that's not there. And that's what we talk about all the time, is we simply do not have enough front doors in this community. Thank you. Ms. Budd?
And I think one of the most exciting things for me every year when the HMIS staff work on these reports is that it helps to inform next steps. And as Commissioner Trigger was kind of alluding to, regarding the exits, we have opportunities to make changes as a result of this data. And particularly, seeing the percentage of exits coming out of the different programs, we have opportunities to improve. And so that's really a key focus, as we continue to move forward, and also around our work with All-In, because the primary focus with that effort is moving people from unsheltered houselessness into permanent housing. And so we definitely have our work cut out for us. We know there hasn't been a significant increase in the amount of housing available in Lane County, as well as any affordable housing in Lane County, but continuing to be creative and to think atypically is important, recognizing that people can make a home in many different types of spaces, whether it's shared housing, whether it's, living in an ADU, for example. And all of those are options as we continue to seek places to place people in permanent housing. I did want to make sure Carly had a chance to share the housing inventory chart, if that's all right with you. I think this is particularly of interest.
Sure, yeah. And I can provide more information when reports are submitted, but we're pretty close to finalizing this HIC, which I got the date wrong on, it's January 25th. But the last Wednesday of every January, we survey both how many individuals are unsheltered in our community, how many are sheltered, but also how many housing slots we have available. And in this case, housing is expansive and includes those emergency shelter and transitional housing beds. So you can see the night of the 25th, here's how many individuals were in each of these project types. We've got also how many beds were available that night and what our utilization rate was. I have pulled out the Egan beds because they're not available every night and because it was open last year, and so that just does not make for a good comparison. But emergency shelter and permanent supportive housing, our utilization is up. And also, I pulled the number of beds that were available last year versus this year, and the number of beds available or units in each of these project types is up. So we're certainly using them.
A question from Commissioner Buck.
Under the rapid rehousing, it shows NA. Is that because it's new?
Yeah, this is a really fun calculation to do. I hear you laughing, but rapid rehousing is just a little bit more complex because we don't know which households we're going to be serving. So we know how much money we have to spend on those rental assistance supports, and we don't know whether that'll be a household of 2 or 1 or 7. And so the way HUD asks us to pull this utilization is to look at how many individuals are housed on that night and just calculate it as 100%. It does just vary so much each year depending on what types of households we're serving. So not a great way to calculate those numbers in the same way that we can for the others.
It would be interesting to know our capacity for rapid rehousing versus the utilization rate. Because from your previous charts, it notes statistically that when people are entering into rapid rehousing, they seem to have a higher outcome to permanent housing. But this particular, I know that you have to submit it to HUD, but maybe for us, that might be a good data point to know.
Certainly, yeah, the number of households we're serving across time, I think could be really helpful.
Thank you.
So we're certainly pleased, especially seeing that our overall capacity increased in this past year among all the different types of housing programs. We know that the need exists, and so as a community, we've been able to continue to increase the number of units and beds.
Quick question on that, Ms. But do we have statistics as to whether or not that's achieving a net zero? So the increase in housing and beds, how does it correspond to the increase in people who are actually entering the field of homelessness or becoming homeless for whatever reason? And if you don't have that number right off the top of your head, that's something that I'm particularly interested in because during the housing of homeless veterans, for instance, what we were looking for was net zero, just the equilibrium point. And if you're there, then you can start building on reducing the numbers. So for a future answer.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the greatest challenges that we're up against is, as Carly had shared, we're seeing the number of people fall into houselessness increase considerably. And so we're continuing as a community kind of chasing after the growth of folks who are becoming houseless. And we saw pretty considerable growth this past 6 months when the eviction moratorium ended, because people were no longer kind of protected from, being able to be evicted. And so many people either chose to leave their units or were indeed exited.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to shift gears and we'll move away from some of the more data-oriented conversation. As y'all know, the governor declared an emergency related to houselessness on January 10th, 2023. And the clock is ticking because it is a one-year declaration. Since the last time that I spoke with you all about the all-in efforts, we have submitted the plan to the state. The state predicted that they would take a week to approve the plan, and indeed came back within that week with an approval of the Lane County plan. I'm really pleased to share that after that approval was given, we found out that we were the only community in Oregon that had an approved plan. And I really want to give credit to our MAC group and to the Housing and Community Action staff who worked very hard, met twice a month for a long period of time to really be able to move this forward, and couldn't have been done without them. So kudos to all involved. Yeah, thank you. And so our plan's been accepted, and from there, we received another timeline from the state. And their timeline included the resubmittal date for plans, as well as when they were going to let those communities know if they were approved. And of course, we do not have to worry about those deadlines, which is why they're crossed off here in the timeline. We are now waiting for the official grant agreement from the state to be provided to us. We do have a draft agreement that County Council has reviewed. And so as soon as we get that formal agreement, we'll begin to move it through our county processes. The state would like the grant agreement within a week. We'll, of course, provide it as soon as we can. And then the state has said that the allocation of funds will be delivered by April 26th. And so that's just within a few short weeks. Regarding the formal funding, we have not yet received word as to what we will be receiving. The approval of our plan did not include approval of the funds. And so that's kind of the X factor that we're dealing with right now. Our plan was a request for a total of $34 million. We were encouraged to ask for what we needed in order to meet the state's outcomes that they had put forth for the county. And so that ask would allow us to do that. We already have a bit of information that indicates we're not going to receive our ask. And so again, we're just waiting with bated breath to hear what that allocation will be, and then we'll likely need to right size our plan to kind of recalculate the overall number of folks who will be served in the community. So the plan that I'm going to speak about in the next few slides is what we provided to the state. Again, the numbers as far as outcomes and funding are still at play and are not confirmed, but this is what we asked for. The top numbers, so if we're looking at preventing homelessness, the top number of 1578 were the number of households that our community proposed we would be able to serve if our total funding request was provided. The state recommended, when they shared with us kind of what they'd like to see in the plan was within that same household number. So we were congruent there. Secondarily, the increase in shelter capacity. As a community, we felt like there was a greater need for additional shelter capacity than what the state was suggesting we request. And so we decided that we would double basically that number. And again, our ask was aligned with that total number of additional emergency beds. For our community, one of the primary ways that we would increase shelter capacity was to transition our alternative shelters, and Carly referenced that often during her presentation. And what those are shelters that don't meet the official HUD emergency shelter definition. And so it might mean that the shelter, maybe it's a pallet shelter, for example, but it doesn't have electricity that someone can plug into in the shelter. And so that means it doesn't meet that official emergency definition. And so we need to deem it an alternative shelter. In our community, while there's emergency shelter or alternative shelters, I don't think that there's a real delineation among the clients. I think it's just more, officialese than anything else. But through these all-in dollars, we have an opportunity to upgrade shelters that are deemed alternative and make them meet the emergency shelter definition. And so, maybe we run electricity through the property to be able to get to the different pallet shelters that don't have electricity, for example. Lastly, the rehousing number was also aligned with the state request at 247. So this is the actual overview of the plan that we submitted to the state. And while I don't want to go through this kind of topic by topic, big picture related to preventing people from experiencing houselessness is that our focus is on providing rent assistance, just like Hava shared, to folks who are at risk of losing their housing, as well as helping people who are couch surfing or doubled up be able to get into permanent housing or stay where they are on a longer term basis by providing, maybe rent to whomever they're staying with, or even sometimes just providing food on a monthly basis to whomever they're staying with might be able to lead to a longer term housing agreement. The next focus with emergency shelter are, as I mentioned, one of the primary focuses is improving our alternative shelters to create emergency shelters. Another primary focus is on increasing the capacity of our existing emergency shelters so that we can serve more people. So for example, if we're thinking about an emergency shelter and they can add 3 more beds because there's a room that just isn't full of beds, then we could help support that. Or maybe there's a shelter and there's room for a few pallet shelters in the backyard of that space. We could also provide those pallet shelters and be able to increase the number of people served. We certainly want to do that thoughtfully because we're not just looking at warehousing individuals, of course, but there are opportunities that have been presented by our local providers that we'll absolutely be considering. What we're not looking for is creating an enormous number of new beds, particularly new facilities, because we really don't have the forecasted funding to sustain new programming. And so we're really looking at how can we sustain what we have now as we move into future years.
A question from the Vice Chair?
Thank you. I think I know the answer to this, but just to clarify and put it out there, each individual unit has to meet the HUD standards, right? So for example, the Conestoga huts, which are very different from pallet shelters because they don't have electricity or heat. If there's a collection of them, like there are at some of the safe sleep sites, but a community area that was insulated, heated, locking, bathrooms, showers was available to the residents in the individual huts, those residents still would not qualify under HUD because their individual unit doesn't meet the standard, is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then the last outcome we focus on is that rehousing of moving people who are unsheltered, living on the streets into permanent housing. And again, creative housing opportunities are absolutely included, looking at shared housing options, working with supports that individuals might have to see if, they might be able to stay with friends or family, et cetera, as well as utilizing other kind of alternative type housing of ADUs or, even, places where an RV can be parked long-term and there's access to restrooms and sewer plugins. So with rehousing, the primary focus of these dollars would be providing what we often refer to as diversion assistance. And diversion is focused on just creative conversations where we're really looking to understand what is someone's support system and what have they done in the past when they've experienced houselessness or they just were struggling with not having a stable home. And is that an option now? We often will have conversations with folks who are like, I stayed with my friend last time, but I've lost touch with them and I haven't spoke with them in, a few months. And so staff might say, hey, can we give them a call and see if you might be able to stay with them again? And maybe if we provide, a security deposit for you to be able to stay in one of their rooms, and we talk about what a rental agreement might look like, maybe this is an option for you again. And believe it or not, it works very well when you open up those lines of communication and start to be able to just listen and negotiate around what could be a possibility. There are plenty of times where a friend might say, oh, no, absolutely not. That's not an option. But then other times where it absolutely is. And so these conversations are really valuable. And in partnership with the conversations comes flexible dollars. And so how might dollars be used to help house someone? Another great example is sometimes when, friends or family are willing to share a bedroom, the price of food that the individual is imposing upon the household is pretty high, and that might be the reason why they can't stay. And so the flexible funding with the diversion program can help by saying, hey, how about if we give you like 3 months of food costs, and would that allow for this person to stay for at least 6 months, and that's an option, as well as just being able to provide security deposit and application fees, because we know that that's extraordinarily expensive. It can cost upwards of $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 for someone to be able to get into a unit. And that often isn't realistic, even for someone who's working 40 hours a week full time, Monday through Friday. So a few things that we've learned since I last spoke with you include that the funding will flow through Lane County. We are in a fortunate position because we are the continuum of care for Lane County, but also the community action agency. And so for some communities, dollars flow in 2 different ways because those entities are with 2 different bodies. But with Lane County, because we're the same, all the dollars flow through, which I do think is an asset because it allows for just more clear and concise information flow, as well as allocation of dollars that focus on the overall outcomes that we should be achieving. I added a frequently asked question page that Oregon Housing and Community Services has put up if anyone's interested in learning more about what their requirements are. And then we also, Lane County has an all-in Lane County webpage. And so if you're interested in updates or the plan that was submitted to the state, that is posted there. We've also learned that the state is requiring for all the programs to be housing focused. And basically what that means is that the programs that are created through All In should focus on reducing housing barriers for folks. So for example, if there's an outreach program that's funded, they should focus on helping people get ID, helping people get health insurance if that contributes to their housing stability, helping people access permanent housing and emergency shelter in order to move out of a street type of housing situation. They also ask for low barrier shelters. And the idea there is that the shelters welcome folks as they are. And that means if someone has possessions that they're not, interested in letting go of, if they have pets, if they have partners that are with them, often referred to as the 3 Ps, that the shelters welcome all and make the space in order to accommodate for things or the opportunity for people to bring in pets. And this, it all depends on, how many things you can bring in based on the shelter and their space. But looking to find a shelter that can accommodate folks as greatly as possible is one of the keys of being a low barrier shelter. Also recognizing that there are some folks who may enter shelter and are, using some type of substance, and that they would be welcome. And then the focus would be on, working to engage with them, to understand, where is their interests at this point? Is treatment an option, and would they like help getting in? Are we really looking at just reducing the harm that they are, doing to their body, and just trying to reduce their overall substance use as well? And that would be a focus of the shelters that we're supporting. And then lastly, that emergency shelter.
Question?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Just thinking about that last comment you made, and a couple thoughts. One, just more a statement that, not everyone who wants to have a drink now and then necessarily has an addiction. So substance use is a broad term, and I just don't want to create the impression that we think anyone who needs shelter services and uses a substance is by definition in need of addiction services or treatment. Absolutely, many, many people are, and they deserve and need it, and we should provide it, but I don't want to put that. And then my related question is, do we consider tobacco use? Is that a barrier sometimes, and is that something that we're offering people cessation support?
It is, yes. Really focused on quality of life. And we recognize that, if someone is using tobacco, that does affect their overall quality of life. And so just checking in to see what they might be ready for and interested, and then having those conversations about, what would it look like if you went down from 4 packs a day to 2 packs a day, for example.
Thank you.
And thank you for that. I have a number of questions along those lines once we get to questions. Thank you. Go ahead.
So this is the official definition of what an emergency shelter looks like. And so thinking about the Conestoga huts, for example, they would be required to have heat, electricity, insulation, locking and closing door, as well as hard surface walls and roofing in order to be considered an official emergency shelter. In no way do I want to say that these shelters are not adequate. I mean, they very much are, and they do protect people and work to provide, basic needs for folks. And we want to continually strive to create the best situation we can for individuals. And so that's part of moving our shelters in this direction. So regarding All In, our next steps include having conversations with our providers to understand what their desires are around contracting and the process to be chosen as a contractor. They recognize that they have a big job to do, the providers, and we certainly value the feedback and recognize that they may have excellent ideas of how to expedite the contract selection process and be able to move forward as quickly as possible, recognizing that the clock is ticking. We also are, again, waiting for that funding to be shared, the amount shared from the state. We will be working with patients and emergency management to create a divisions operations center. And what that really looks like is to be able to create a kind of a mini operations center that allows us to focus more specifically on different aspects of our all-in programming, and to do it in a more targeted and rapid way that those in emergency management would do. And I can share, I've already learned a great deal from patients and really appreciate being able to take their practices and overlay it upon what it is that is ordinarily done within the homelessness and housing services. And it has already, given us a chance to just, put that mirror in front of us and say, okay, how can we do things better and more quickly? So it's been a great partnership already, and I know that will continue. We're having what we hope to be an all-day retreat with the multi-agency coordinating group in a few weeks to be able to dig down even further as to what are the action steps that we need to do, especially around systems change, and how, for example, we can create a more coordinated access point for rent assistance so that folks don't have to get onto numerous different wait lists as they're moving forward. And then also, we're going to work closely with the Oregon Housing and Community Services technical assistance providers who are paid through the state to be able to support our work. And so we certainly want to take advantage of their expertise while they're available. So I'll pause there. And I'm happy to either take questions about All In now, or I can kind of run through the final slides. And
let's go to a round of questions, but first
Sure.
I'll look at you, Ms. Winningham. Anything you'd like to add before we move into questions?
Thank you, Chair Farr. I'm recovering, so I apologize. So I just want to be clear that we've heard a lot about the activation of the Emergency Operations Center, and I helped Kate and others understand that we are not recommending activating our Emergency Operations Center, which is a component of this organization and all of our stakeholders to respond in emergencies, whereas we are in fact opening a somewhat like a department operations center, a division operations center, as Kate said. Kate's division is really responding to this event and using the action plan as guiding their work. My role here has really just been to, I think, essentially be the mirror for Kate and her team to help her see how the incident command system or the incident command structure can be utilized to help accelerate their work and meet the goals that have been identified by the governor. Because we have limited staff in emergency management currently across the board in Lane County, our ability to really come in and take over is not there, and of not our interest. They are the subject matter experts. And so our approach has really just been coaching, doing a little hand-holding, and we'll be supporting that multi-agency coordination retreat to facilitate a discussion on how are they going to accomplish those objectives or those action items that the MAC group has identified, and start assigning tasks and being much more specific and deliberate in how are they going to spend down those dollars and distribute those dollars. And so our relationship is really just a facilitated discussion and support for Kate and her team, and she's doing a phenomenal job. I think she sells herself a little bit short in her team in that, yes, Lane County was the first to get their plan across the table and approved, and we just returned from our state conference of emergency managers, and there were enormous accolades of folks looking at Lane County and explaining how great we've done in order to get this work done. And I think utilizing the ICS system and bringing in emergency management has helped us be successful. We will be pulling on state resources to help support us with technical assistance from OEM and OHCS, and leveraging those resources and assets at the state level will help us continue with the current momentum, I believe, going forward.
Well, thank you for those few words that really covered a great deal of territory. You know, the fact that we have a division operations center that really will perform all of the functions of an emergency operations center without all in an emergency operations center, which we do need from time to time. And you have stood up on more occasions than you'd like to have stood the Emergency Operations Center up. But I'm going to say this before we get to questions from the board, just a general statement. And you know, at the LGAC meeting, the Local Government Advisory Committee meeting last week, Jill Smith, who's the Oregon Housing Community Services Director for Housing Stability, talked about you specifically, the team and how you've operated, and praised you in front of all of the counties, in front of all of the regions, for getting the plan in first and getting accepted first first application. That's no small deal. That and the work that really goes between the pair of you, not just the pair of you, but you know, the emergency division and the human services division getting this done. It really is a model for the entire state. They look at it. The entire state looks at it. And Ms. Winningham, last year I had a chance to speak at the Emergency Operators Annual Conference, and I'll tell you what, you can't believe the high esteem that our emergency manager is held in that organization. So really, applause for the work that you do. Applause for making this whole thing just more smooth than it should have been. So with that, I'm going to look to the Board of County Commissioners for questions. I have a list of questions, and I prefer that they ask them first. So if none of them are asked, then I'll ask mine. So look around for the queue. Let's start with Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I've been able to stand in on a couple of the MAC meetings, and I can see how heavy the workload really is that you've been dealing with and going through, and appreciate all your time and energy. And I know there's a whole team there that's been doing the same. A lot of time. And that, I hope, is a very good indication that we're going to be successful in this program. I do have a question as to help for funding your positions. It's my understanding that there's some portion, a minimal amount of portion, that can go to administration. And I'm curious as to how much that is really funding what you're doing, including the Emergency Management Division. Because I want to make sure we're covering minimum needs for your work, and if you have any additional thoughts there.
So I can share that in the plan request, we asked for 21% administration, and that does include capacity building for agencies, training related to all-in work, as well as kind of an environmental work. And so there's some caveats there. We're hopeful that we might see that level of administration, though again, not knowing the funding allocation, we're not clear on what will be provided at this point.
So you haven't gotten any funding so far, clearly, because we're awaiting a contract.
Correct.
So far, everybody who's been in the partner in the MAC group has just been putting in the effort. I guess they can think of it as our skin in the game. But we know that probably other work isn't happening because we're focusing on this and it's such a big need. And it sounds like we expect that contract by the end of the week. Is that right?
So the agreement that was shared did not include dollar figures. I do hope in the next few weeks we'll understand the dollar figures.
I see. I think I thought from the slides that April 7th was the day that we were expecting at least a draft contract. And you've gotten the draft, but without dollar figures included. Is that
correct?
That's right. Okay. So we don't know that yet. I think that's just, of all the things that you've presented, all of which are excellent, excellent. That is probably my one concern, is to ensure that we're able to sustain your work and through the, the end of the year, basically, in order to be successful for the program fully. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you, Commissioner Buck. And, that number that we're asking for, 34, probably is going to look more like 24 when we finally get it. But hope springs eternal, right? So moving down the board, if nobody else has questions, I can jump in. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, just phenomenal work. My one question is, has there been discussion at the MAC yet, or maybe it's too soon, about the geographic focus of initiatives and interventions and programs? How we'll share that across the county?
Yes, and what I can share is that the plan overview document does include specific programming targeted to rural areas in our community, as well as just focusing on the west, southern, eastern parts of the county. And we are fortunate that members of the MAC group are very thoughtful about really providing support to our community members across Lane County. And so we're going to be providing particular attention to carrying out those specific focus areas as we seek to contract with providers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Further questions? Commissioner Seneca.
Yeah, I just have, lots of questions. Great job. It's such a complex problem, and you guys do a great job of breaking it down. If we see a slash on our ask, are you thinking bringing each housing down, or are you going to focus more on some, or what are your guys' thoughts there? So I saw different programs that I think will do great, especially the emergency shelters. I mean, obviously you can get more beds in there and those kind of things, but what are your guys' thoughts, or what direction are you headed?
So we have a small inkling of what our prevention dollars might look like. And as we continue to learn more about the others, we'll bring it back to the MAC group and work through a process of right-sizing our overall programs and the outcomes connected to each of those programs. And so, it could be as far as actually reducing the number of program focus areas in order to, increase the outcomes in other focus areas, or it might just be reducing, outcomes across the board. And we very much want to get the MAC group's thoughts on that before moving forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. And, they told you to ask for what we needed, right? And you asked for what we needed. So, if they perk up their ears and recognize that we're not asking for more than we need, we're asking for what we need to provide those minimum numbers that you've outlined to us. That's where we're moving. Commissioner Lovell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Great job again. Very complex. My mind feels like a bunch of those sprinkles filtering all the information through it into that vat to ask an intelligent question. The thing that kind of struck me, though, about all of the data was you had what looked like we're really targeting and moving the needle on about 20% of the people. Is that really what I gathered from that? Am I off base in thinking that? Because the calls that I get from my constituents are always about the big housing and unhoused problem and homeless problem. And the conversation always stems around, it always looks like there's about 80% of the people that are just involved in our toxic charity, but yet there's really only 20% of the people that really want help and those that we can advocate for help. So is that what I'm seeing in those slides as well, is basically what you're experiencing as well?
I think what I see when I look through those slides is that we're really focusing as a community on those that have the higher needs within kind of the houseless population. And so, who are most vulnerable and are most likely to pass away on our streets. And we do that through investing in permanent supported housing, investing in rapid rehousing, and then also investing in emergency shelter to be able to move people off the street. rates. And so it does mean that there's a smaller faction of people who are going to be assisted through the supports that are provided. It doesn't mean we don't serve folks who have lower needs. It just means that the majority of the supports that are provided through the county are targeted to people who have higher needs, really because those are the folks who are also taxing the other kind of institutions of care that we have in our community. If you think about the Fuse program that I presented on a few months ago, that's the population that we're primarily targeting, so that we see a reduction in jail use among those folks. We see a reduction in emergency department and inpatient hospitalization use among those folks. And then, we also seek to provide assistance to others, but there just aren't enough dollars to go around, as you well know, to be able to support everyone at this point.
Yeah, well, my point is that I think you're focusing the money to move the needle the most, and I appreciate that about your efforts. And also, I appreciate the fact that you're also looking forward to, like, whatever we expand, we also have to think about how we're going to sustain that in the future. I think that's a really great quality to have in this whole plan, because obviously we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot by doing all this great thing and then, oops, we run out of money and we can't continue it. So I appreciate that most about your plan. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And a quick question, do you have more presentation to give to us?
I do, though I can abbreviate it.
And I have a couple of quick questions. There's something that you said earlier on that kind of goes a little bit toward what Commissioner Lovell was stating. We don't have a dramatic increase in housing units at any level. I kind of paraphrase that. Didn't put quotation marks, because quotation marks are reserved for accurate and exact. But we continue to find ways to be creative in finding safe places for people to sleep. And what you talked about are places that don't necessarily meet HUD standards, but they do meet my Safe Tonight standards. And there's something else that you said, that the clients who we're serving, there's no delineation between alternative shelter and emergency shelters in their mind. That's kind of a made-up thing in some ways by HUD. You called it, officialese was the term you used. And I love that, because we stick officialese on real human need, and all of a sudden officialese becomes what we're looking to achieve, not real human need satisfaction. And what you're doing, Kate, and what your team has done since you got here, you're focusing on real human need, and it's noticeable. Across the board, it's noticeable that where the officialese is, I don't ever hear officialese come out of your mouth. You don't speak that language. You talk in terms that people understand, and you talk in terms that mean safe places to sleep. And when you talk about why can't you stay with the host any longer, and it turns out, well, they eat a lot of food. Well, how about if we give you money for food? Simple, relatively inexpensive problems that keep people in a safe place to stay. And that is what you've really been focusing on. And that is what that department has really been, that's the highlight of the department over the last year and a half, 2 years, even longer since you, is it coincidental? Since you got here, Kate, that we really are focusing on human need, making dollars go a long way. And we understand that after 1 year, this program's over. So anything new that we start up, we have to find a way to sustain it beyond 1 year. We're not just sustaining this year, we're sustaining these efforts this year, but how do we make things last longer? And your focus on not establishing new programs, fortifying existing programs to give them a greater chance of being sustainable for the long term. And that is really the exciting part about this. And that's what is being talked about at the state level, is the way that Lane County is looking at things and the teamwork that's gone into this. And so I have more questions. Most of my questions will be regarding what I've heard other people ask, what's Lane County doing? I hear that all the time, what's Lane County doing? Tell me what Lane County's doing. Well, I like to say your words, and I like to say your words, Special, and I like to say your words, Director Gray. And Carly, Ms. Walker, I like to say your words too. I don't like my words, so keep talking. Back to you.
Sure. And so the next part, this is really just an overview synopsis of our outcomes and outputs that are required among the 65 contracted programs that we have through the Housing and Community Action Office. And when I came on board about a year and a half ago, one of the questions that I received was, are we even requiring our agencies to do things? And we have incredible agencies who work extraordinarily hard to support those who are at risk of homelessness and experiencing homelessness. And really, this is our opportunity to show off some of the great work that they're doing. And to know that each of our contracted programs have specific outcomes and outputs that we are tracking and working to make sure that they achieve those outcomes and outputs. We continue to right size those expectations and also align them with the system performance measurements like Carly mentioned, as well as a community action agency, we have what they call national performance indicators. And so it's another metric that we tie our programs to as well. And so this is a very high-level overview of the different types of programs that we have, and then how we tie those outcomes and outputs to our programs. And so what I did here is I provided a summary of where our agencies and their programs are related to the key outcomes and outputs. So for example, our prevention assistance programs, again, Hava was talking at one earlier today with rent assistance. And we have seen the number of rent assistance programs grow this last year because of additional state and federal dollars. And overall, our programs are exceeding where we would expect them to be at 6 months into a 1-year contract. Ultimately, we'd hope they'd be around 50%. They're over 73% progressed in meeting the outcomes among all those 10 prevention programs. One unique program that we have with prevention is with the Oregon Law Center, and they are able to provide eviction prevention support and mediation between tenants and landlords, whether they are able to stop an eviction or to just mediate so that both parties can just exit their relationship and do no more harm to one another. Community service and access centers, this is connected to our community action work. This is very much the hub for individuals to really be able to just go in and talk to someone and talk about what are the needs that they have. We specifically have hubs in Florence. We have one in a community sharing down in Cottage Grove, and then Catholic Community Services in Springfield, so that they do, they're more accessible to people across Lane County. These programs as well are exceeding that 50% mark that we would hope they would be in. We have great food security programs, which include the Lane County Food Bank, as well as the Upper Willamette CDC. This is one of our strongest relationships with an entity in the Oak Ridge area that provides food to that community. Interestingly, for the food banks, they've struggled to kind of bring their service level up as they're kind of coming out of the COVID restrictions. As you can imagine, there were fewer clients seeking food boxes, for example, because they didn't want to come in contact with folks, as well as just fewer opportunities for people to access food boxes. And so we're seeing that increase quite a bit. Our community action programs, which really focus on helping to move people out of poverty and seeing their income increase. We have 2 targeted programs to support parents with the Pearl Buck Center and also the Relief Nursery. They're just hitting the ball out of the park as far as meeting their outputs. And it makes sense too, because if we think about the stress that COVID has placed upon parents in our community, the more supports, the better for any parent. Street outreach programs, this is also, we've seen an increase in the number of programs overall. They're doing an excellent job in meeting their targets, including providing access to health care supports in our community. We also provide housing navigation to the City of Eugene alternative shelters. As you know, the City of Eugene has done an extraordinary job in increasing the number of shelter that's provided.
To the county commissioner meeting, and is it,
There's someone online that we can hear. If you would mute your mics, please.
I mean, I think she's going to be finished with her presentation here in just a little bit. Okay, all right. Yes, I will. Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Pardon me, to the person who just said bye-bye, your mic is live, so could you hit your mute button, please? We can all hear you. Ms. Budd, go ahead.
So thanks to the City of Eugene for really doing an extraordinary job of increasing the number of shelter opportunities in our community. And we've partnered with them to be able to provide housing navigation to help move folks from the shelters into permanent housing. And so those navigation providers, they continue to work hard. We're really focused on moving people into permanent housing situations, and they continue to work toward their goals. Emergency shelters, and this is just those who meet the emergency shelter definition. We're really pleased with the utilization rate and that has increased between this year and last. And we continue to focus on those exits to permanent housing.
And pardon me, Ms. Budd, when you say meets the emergency shelter definition, that's the HUD emergency shelter definition?
Correct. Yes, thank you.
Which doesn't necessarily indicate the type of shelter where people can feel safe tonight, just what is officially, no, what is the HUD definition? Thank you.
And then rapid rehousing, which is providing rent assistance and supportive services to folks who are renting in our regular rental market. And these programs really are doing pretty well compared to the outcomes that we put forth for them. Permanent supported housing, this is targeted to people who have the very highest needs. I like to show the overall number of vouchers and units that are available because I think folks just don't realize how many people with high needs are supported throughout all of Lane County. And that this doesn't just include those who are in facility-based housing units. The PSH programs too, they're below their outcome of maintaining permanent housing for at least 12 months. And so that's something that we're working on with them, but have helped the residents maintain or increase their overall income. So this is the 6-month mark, and we continue to work collaboratively with our grantees. One of the major changes that's been made this year is that staff are pulling these outputs or outcomes on a quarterly basis and providing them to the agencies to make sure that they're aware of where they are so that at the end of the year, there's no surprises. And when we come back to all of you to share these outcomes and outputs, the agencies are well aware and had opportunities to make changes to those. We're also focusing on actively monitoring all of our programs. During COVID, that fell to the wayside a bit just due to all the other needs that arose. And so really appreciate our contracting and fiscal and program staff who have made a calendar for the full year to ensure all programs are monitored. Any questions?
No, we have none. I'll look to the board for questions. I have a couple of questions. This is a very thorough presentation, but in fact, if you look at the slides, some of these slides are slides that I've been dreaming of actually seeing for a long, long time. And you've got it all together in a place where we can actually see it. And we can actually present it if any one of us chooses to use 4 or 5 slides for a presentation to a different group, for instance. We can draw from this deck of slides. So, Vice Chair Trieger, did I see a hand raised? No?
Not yet, or.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and talk a little bit. We don't need to just talk for the sake of talking. There's a lot to talk about, and you presented a great deal of information. But I think a couple of questions that I have. You talked about pallet shelters, for instance, and that is there room in the backyard for additional pallet shelters? I didn't write down the exact quote. Now, back in the late 1990s, I was on the committee. In fact, I actually chaired that committee that established the City of Eugene's camping ordinance at the time. It's evolved pretty significantly since then, which allowed for some backyard camping, RV placement in backyards, even in driveways. Are we working closely with the City of Eugene to make sure that they're not being too tight on the regulations that were prescribed years ago? Are they doing a good job, the cities, are they doing a good job of allowing, for instance, pallet shelters in backyards, if that's, if that works for space?
I think that they are very well aware that that is a prime opportunity to increase housing capacity in the community, and that they have a number of processes in place. The housing pipeline plan, for example, does include opportunities to support neighbors in increasing the number of ADUs in backyards, et cetera. And so I think that that is very much on their radar, and that they are going through a number of different processes to help increase the number of those untraditional housing options.
Very deftly stated. So they're working on it. And I think, as always, the people who live on the other side of the fence have a great deal of say as to what happens in my backyard, and a lot of the issues that we see are complaint-based, where people say, well, I don't like what's going on in the backyard, so crack down on it. And we'll continue to have that as an indicator of how we can move forward, particularly in neighborhoods. So now, at this point, I think we do have further questions from the board, so Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. When it comes to navigation centers or housing, transitional housing, things like that, I've recently become aware that insurance has become either very expensive or non-existent. And I now understand the pressures that some of our partners have in continuing to provide that kind of service. My question is, have you heard that? And have there been any solutions that have come across the board? Because if our partners aren't able to ensure the sites that meet the goals of this plan over time, they're not going to be able to continue doing that kind of business. And that's a real concern for me.
Thank you. I appreciate you asking this question. It's something that we have seen rise most prominently in the last few years for nonprofit agencies, especially related to those who have houselessness programs, whether it's insurance agencies unexpectedly dropping an agency overall or struggling to find insurance, that may be less costly or just may be available overall. I have heard from a few providers recently about struggles that they're having. And what I really appreciate is that those providers are coming to the table with ideas around solutions. And so at this point, we're just collecting those ideas and do intend to have some internal conversations about what might be possible at the county level potentially, and where there might be some advocacy opportunities at the state level as well, because I've not just seen this challenge in Lane County. I think that this is occurring, at least up and down the West Coast, as we're seeing the numbers of programs that support people who are unhoused increase. And so I hope that this is a broader conversation that we can continue to have even in Salem and beyond.
I appreciate that, because I do think it is a bigger issue than just our local providers here, and it's going to need either federal or state attention, especially if we're talking about how we're going to communicate our issues with insurance companies. That's typically not something we as a board here really have jurisdiction over. But as we try to roll out programs, if we don't have providers that can insure themselves, this is going to be a problem on our horizon. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that comment, Commissioner Buck, because it helped shape less a question, but because you sort of answered the question that this comment leads to, which is one of the things I see as really exciting about this is we're really creating demonstration projects. The state, this emergency order that Governor Kotek has issued, and hopefully sufficient dollars that come with it to implement our plan, absolutely, completely agree and appreciate your focus on individual people and how this is going to impact the humanitarian crisis that we're experiencing all over the country, but we're focused here in Lane County. But it's also going to give us a chance to do some demonstration projects to, as you said, highlight some of the systemic issues that are at play, because that's when we talk about sustaining programs or long-term stability, that really is going to require some systemic change. So things like insurance requirements, things like codes and zoning for what kinds of programs can be placed where is so important. So I'm really happy to hear those kind of conversations are happening and that providers are bringing solutions, because what I also hope we come out of this with is not only fewer people suffering and in a really untenable cycle, but some real opportunities to, you know, we have the obvious, not enough front doors, rents are high, wages are low. We know that, we get that, it bears repeating, but there's so many other factors. I often talk about that proverb, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, you teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And that's a great statement about the value of education. But if the system in which educated folks are trying to operate, you know, if all the rivers are polluted and there's laws that say fishing poles can't be more than 18 inches long and worms cost $50 each and there's no way to get to the fishing hole, it doesn't matter how adept people are at fishing. We have not created the conditions for them to succeed. So I hear these projects as being not only addressing the immediate need, but a real opportunity for us to create a really strong systems change agenda, if you will, and build that coalition of folks in the community, our providers, the people receiving services, to help us move that. So thank you for taking such a holistic look and always holding that tension between serving individuals but addressing the systemic challenges that got us here. Thank you.
Thank you for that analogy, Commissioner. That was, you talk in terms a lot of people understand when you talk about very specific things. I think you really outlined it beautifully there. Teaching people to fish, but, you know, making worms not accessible. That's a pretty wonderful analogy. Further questions from the board? Then I think we're moving toward the end of the presentation. This is wonderful. And we have, for anybody watching online, just click on View Items, and you've got the entire presentation is available to you right online, and there's a wealth of information in there. I wanted to point out that, as always, and you mentioned this, that agencies are having difficulty. The agencies that we rely on are having difficulty with staffing because of their inability to pay competitive wages, for instance, as an example, and simply because it's the work is hard, the work is long, and sometimes the rewards sometimes don't exceed the effort that people have to put in. So I know that we're working with our agencies to fortify them, and it's good to see, for instance, Director Perot, the new Director of Catholic Community Services, looking at new ways to deliver even more food, new ways to deliver even more safe nights, people sleeping, getting new ideas into it. And I'm going to talk a little bit, just ever so briefly, I talk about you being a hero all the time, Kate, and you're a hero. You brought things from across state lines, and you're helping us see things in a new way and helping see the resources that we have in ways that we can more adequately use the resources and more thoroughly use the resources to serve the human need, the human equation. And one last question that I have, and is you mentioned that we're the Continuum of Care and the Community Action Agency, and you say that puts us in a particularly strong position. And that is, I just wanted to talk about that ever so briefly. We are both of those agencies, which are HUD-required agencies, in order to receive the resources, the funding that they send to us. But that is a particularly strong position. Can you just give a sentence or two on why we're strong in that regard?
I think that the opportunity to kind of bring the the goals of being continuum of care and really focusing on reducing the number of people who are houseless, and then being a community action agency and reduce the number of people who are in poverty, those go hand in hand. And we know that there's a great deal of systemic opportunities that can help improve the realities for folks who are houseless and in poverty. And so when you support those who are houseless, you're also supporting those who are in poverty. And just regarding brass tacks, the dollars all flow through the county. And so it also means that we can do things in a more collaborative way. And community action affords us the opportunity to receive community service block grant dollars, which are very flexible. And so it often means that we can braid those dollars together with much less flexible funding so that we can create programs that are more effective at meeting the needs of those in our community, and are more desirable for the agencies in our community. And so a lot of strengths there. Certainly, there are strengths, in other ways when those are separate, but definitely being together, I think it's a real asset for our community.
And the fly that I was casting there was the one that you said in the middle, that the dollars for this are flowing through Lane County, which allows us to have a, not oversight, not direction of, but oversight of how how the efforts are coordinated inside of Lane County. And whenever we can do that, we are responsible. We are the health agency in Lane County. We are the, we're public health. And we're human services. The cities aren't that, and the state isn't that. We are. And so whenever we can focus things on the programs in Lane County so that we can at least have an understanding of what is going on with the different agencies. When the state sends money directly to agencies, quite often it works a little bit against the general purpose of the mission and the outcomes that we're desiring. In this case, the money is flowing through Lane County to be distributed to the people who are actually boots on the ground doing the work. Thank you for that. Anything further? Then Ms. Budd, Ms. Walker, Ms. Winningham, and Director Gray, thank you for being here this morning. Great presentation. To anybody watching, we've got about 82 pages online, and every page has a wealth of information. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow. All right, then we're moving down our agenda. Oh,
Want to pass it?
yeah. Let me put my glasses on so I know what I'm
Brought
passing.
enough to share. It's like kindergarten.
There we go.
revisions.
We have
Thank you.
handouts in class today.
Then we'll move along to county administration announcements, and I understand, Mr. Mokraski, you have some announcements for us.
Sure, thank you, Chair. Very hard to follow that presentation. A great presentation by our team, and thanks for the questions and comments that you all shared there. But I did, as always, we'll provide an elections update every Tuesday that we have a board meeting. So I provided you a handout, and I'll walk through just briefly what that is, as well as a couple other updates on the elections cycle. So our Lane County Elections Office created a life cycle of a ballot graphic, which is in front of you, and we also have it up here on the screen. So hopefully Diana's working on getting that enlarged so folks at home that are watching this remotely can see it as well, and this is available on our website. You can follow along on this life cycle of a ballot graphic, and you can see just 18 days ago that we began the election cycle for this May election with the certification of all the races and the ballot measures. Between then and now, over 266 ballots were created and proofed, securely sent to the print vendor, and then official ballots were produced and securely transported to the elections office, and our election staff is prepared and mailed just under 1,000 uniform and overseas citizens absentee voting act ballots. There's an acronym for that. UOCAVA is the acronym, so that's the Uniform and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act. Those are active military and citizens living overseas and their partners or dependents. So those have been mailed. There were 987 of those ballots that were mailed last Friday, March 31st. Lane County Elections also sent an email blast to those individuals so that they're aware that they're in the mail based on the email that was in file. We've notified them that their ballot was mailed and advised them of their right to vote by electronic transmission. So again, just want to highlight this, and this is a nice tool for folks who kind of question, like, you know, what actually happens in the creation and the distribution and then collection and counting of ballots. This is a nice sort of somewhat simplified life cycle of a ballot from the original printing of the ballot to the delivery to voters, to the return to a ballot box or to our elections office or via mail. And then the process that our staff goes through to make sure that every vote is counted and is safe and secure. And so important, particularly at a time which, you know, if there's any question or concern related to the safety and security of the ballot and electoral process, that people understand what actually happens, that we're responsive to any concerns that might arise, and that people actually understand the safety and security with which we guard those ballots. So overseas military ballots have been mailed. The voters pamphlet is in the final proofing stages. The final product for the voters pamphlet will be published to elections website no later than April 17th. Select portions of the voters pamphlet will be available in a simplified Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Russian, Spanish, and Vietnamese languages. Translations can be found online at oregonvotes.gov/lanevp. The elections website will also link voters to the translated content. So the household should expect to get their voters pamphlet in the mail a few days prior to their ballots arriving. So before you get your ballot, you should get your voters pamphlet. Of course, ballots go out the week of April 24th, and we'll provide that update as we near that date. In addition to election voter registration information, Lane County voters pamphlet will include candidate and endorsement information for 65 candidates, 4 measures along with explanatory statements for those 4 measures, and 10 measure arguments. So there are, you know, arguments for and against different measures that people are allowed to submit, and so there were 10 arguments submitted for 4 different measures on the ballot. So that's what we have today. Happy to answer any questions that I'm able to. Of course, our website, Lane County or.gov/elections is a great resource as kind of a starting point to give you information about Lane County elections, and then to point you to the Secretary of State's office for Oregon statewide elections information.
Thank you, Ms. Brokers. It looks like we do have a couple of questions. One thing that really stood out for me is one sentence that you said, the safety and security as to which we guard those ballots. That means a lot to people. Vice Chair Trieger?
I'm just going to give Dina and her team a shout out again this week. This is great, and wondering if we need like a Dave Frischberg style song to go with this, like the I'm Just a Bill, but we need it for what happens,
yeah,
the life cycle of a ballot at Lane County. Thank you for that. This is great.
We're abound with analogies today. I love it.
Yeah, our
I
county
see
clerk-
these little graphics and the flow chart, and
That's my,
know,
that's my territory. That's my zone.
Tina Dawson and our elections team did continue to do a great job. I mean, you know, in the last election, we had in the November election, the 24/7 or virtually, essentially 24/7 video monitoring of all of the different rooms at elections. That was something that was new. This life cycle of the ballot, you know, is new. And so we're trying to just find different ways. I think the exciting thing that's happening right now is there are more people paying attention to the elections process. So it's an opportunity. We have a captive audience to be able to talk about the great work that we do here in Lane County and in Oregon with making sure that our elections process is easily accessible and that it is safe and secure. So we'll continue to do that, and certainly welcome thoughts and feedback from the public and from commissioners in that effort.
And what you're doing, Ms. Mokrax, more than I've ever seen, is you're shining a spotlight on it. You're illuminating the process, so it is really easy to spot from the outside exactly what's going on at any one point in time during the entire process. Superb. And my congratulations to the entire staff over at Lane County Elections. I'll be there on the 17th with Voodoo Donuts, as always. Anything further on that? Then any more, Ms. Mokrax? Any more announcements?
That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good news. Then we'll move on down the agenda to County Council. Ms. Pettigrew, hello. I've been saying hello from the back of the room. Now hello up a little bit closer.
Hello, thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. Nice to see you this morning. Just a few brief announcements. We are well on our way to being fully staffed. Yesterday, we welcomed Steve Deal as a new attorney in our office, joining the esteemed team of Steves here in Lane County. And tomorrow, we will welcome Rebecca Dorman also to our office. And so I'm very happy that they've decided to join us. And I want to thank again our county HR department, the talent team in particular, for bringing on these exceptional professionals, and as well all the people that helped us in our recruitment process. It takes a lot to go through that, and it's a lot of time, and I just want to thank them for those investments. I look forward to introducing these two new folks to all of you and all of our colleagues in the county in the coming weeks. I also wanted to provide an update as to my progress in our public records reform. We're looking at new software tools to provide more transparency, tracking, and availability of documents, both to the public as well as our custodians across the county who help us in providing public records when requested. And we're looking at demos, and I am excited to share those demos with you all soon, as well as some of our primary custodians here in the county. We also have launched a collaboration with the Office of the Public Records Advocate, which is an office that was created after a bill was passed in 2017. These are professionals who help entities such as ours make sure that we are following best practices and provide technical expertise to make sure that our public records system is top-notch. They have agreed to provide free training for our staff as well as our legal professionals, and that could include this board and anyone in our county who is interested in learning more about those processes. They will also be providing an evaluation of our current systems. So I will keep you apprised as that project moves along, but I'm very excited about those collaborations and opportunities to make improvements to that system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pettigrew. I'll look for questions from the board. Well done on filling out the staff, and I understand that one of our retired attorneys, Andy Clark, is doing a little bit of contract work on land use for us at this time also. So.
That is correct, Chair. We're very grateful to Mr. Clark for being willing to come back and join us as we go through this transition. He will be aiding and mentoring Rebecca Dorman as she takes on the principal duties of land use attorney for the county. And so we appreciate that additional professional assistance in that. And he's a trusted partner in our office, and thankful to him taking that time out of his retirement to come back and help out.
He has been a go-to for a lot of years. He answers questions, or has for years, for me, questions that, just weird questions. He has a depth of knowledge that just admirable, only comes from years of experience. Further questions? Anything? Well, Ms. Pettigrew, thank you very much for being with us this morning, and we'll move down the agenda, back in Yorkshire now, aren't I? To executive session, we have no need for executive session today. And any other business before we move into recess this morning, Ms. Mokoraxi? Then, at 10:47 p.m., we are in recess until 1:30. I said p.m., didn't I?
AM.
a.m., thank you. I'm 8 hours away.